this may be a valuable effort or task to take on in order to translate some of the benefits to the modern world. If we look at, in the simplest terms, what is happening when someone goes into a deep state of meditation or practices various techniques daily for many years, or if we just see how someone who has never practiced before immediately experiences something after only trying it once, these are all valid or at least valuable opportunities for assessing the efficacy of a practice. When you're doing something, you want to know what the value is. And while the best scientists know that science itself is an endeavor for discovering and uncovering knowledge on a consistent basis, so that the best science of this year should be in many ways outdated within the coming decade, or however you want to parse that out. That science is meant to be an ongoing, reiterative practice, and in the same way that any of us would be assessing and reassessing our own daily practice or progress, however we define it. So that's the first thing, is that we have a lens for viewing our own practice or process that's mirrored by the scientific process itself, and that there is an actual way to determine the validity of practices. Now, getting into the specifics of what kind of validity we're talking about when we're looking at changes in something like biometrics, there's our heart rate or any changes in heart, whether it's the resting heart rate or heart rate variability or blood pressure or different rhythms like heart coherence. And then looking at the brain, there's different brainwave states that we can go into, and within each, say, major brainwave like alpha, beta, theta, gamma, delta, there's different levels of coherence within those brainwaves, and the ability to sustain those and do it on command, etc., all point to specific simple ways that we all now have access to. Pretty much most people have access to some kind of heart rate monitor, whether it's their phone or just even feeling for your own pulse. And now there are brainwave sensors like wearable EEGs that people can buy on the internet. And then getting into more specific or detailed information like changes in blood chemistry, like reductions in something called C-reactive protein or different inflammatory markers, or even genetics like the length of telomeres, which are the shoestrings at the end of our DNA that shorten as we age, and as they lengthen or as we change our response to stress, they can lengthen. And with time and ongoing research, there's a way for this to be brought to the masses so that we can bring more scientific awareness to various behaviors, lifestyle interventions, or spiritual practices or exercises, whatever we decide to measure, that there's a way for citizen science to provide a much greater level of data than modern science has yet to reach. And this is obviously really valuable for healthcare, and generally the collection of patient data is very important and central to healthcare and doctors in making decisions, and in being able to say, well, there's a standard deviation for these practices to do this when you practice this way, or at least that knowing that there is a certain type of response you can elicit from certain practices when done correctly. And so just bringing that scientific awareness to the world of spirituality, which is so commonly shrouded in mysticism or baked in woo-woo ideology, that there's a place for these two worlds to come together, and yet they so commonly avoid each other. And for what it's worth, there's a good reason for people who are on the more spiritual side of things to lean away from materialist, rational, reductionist philosophy, Cartesian philosophy about modern science, because it has its limitations. And at the same time, obviously, many scientists who are strict materialist, or at least focused on empirical data and looking at data, want to know that can be relied on, and that the n equals 1 doesn't necessarily, like one person saying something as a subjective report doesn't necessarily validate any of their claims. So there are valid points to both perspectives, and to be able to recognize the inherent value in both perspectives for checking one another, and for recognizing that if you do have a more scientific perspective, that there's a certain kind of openness that is valuable to asking the right questions, or to discovering new things, that anyone who has made a major discovery has looked beyond the status quo, or looked beyond what tradition often said. And at the same time, that being in the more spiritualist camp has often led to great accomplishments beyond the field of science, and especially in regards to compassion or understanding the human condition, which science has not completely discovered how to categorize, and perhaps that's for good reason. That, especially when we look at the psyche or psychology or the human experience, or even neuroscience or neurobiology, that there's so much that we have yet to understand about basic things like sleep and memory and emotion, that the basic things that make up our experience are often what we would think of as the most important, and yet there's a lot of value to seeing how science and spirituality both play in many ways into these direct felt experiences. And our job is to look with an open mind, a critical mind, and being able to have that discernment and intuition to be able to see what's really going on, and to recognize the value and the validity to certain arguments or to certain positions that we may not initially understand. And that's from whichever perspective you're coming from, is being open to the different perspectives, especially if you don't initially agree with them, and the better you can explain things from a multi-perspective angle, the more likely it is that it is accurate. And at the same time, there's a certain level of trust that's required to see that wherever that there are essentially good actors, or that people are sharing knowledge to the best of their ability, that regardless of why people are sharing information, that they generally believe it to be the best, and that even if there are many half-truths baked into that, that there is a certain looking deeper into what is the real message that's being shared. Do your best. Peace.